Alright everybody, how are we doing today? Hopefully better than Jeffrey Epstein. Now I'm not sure how what I want to say or how I feel about that yet, but still, Epstein lived, according to Rupley, Epstein lived in a netherworld where normal rules don't apply. How many more Epsteins are out there? Forget how he died. The real mystery is how Jeffrey Epstein lived, committing acts that would get a normal person jailed, all while the next to world's most watched men. How did he create a protective bubble around himself? Take, for example, Epstein's financial career, the foundation for so much of his other criminal activity. Excuse me. While doubts about his methods for obtaining wealth for his clients had been circulating on Wall Street for years, throughout that time, he'd been described at face value as a financier and a billionaire. In the past several months, we have discovered that he likely was no billionaire, and no one is sure whether he ever did conduct any legitimate business activities, or even where any of his money came from. Very curious. But apparently no one can seem to figure out where his income came from exactly. Which would lead me to think that there was some illicit profit motive. Although he was definitely a pedophile and or hebophile, he was into teenage girls, and that's very creepy indeed. Yet there was definitely big money involved, as is evidenced by superficially inexplicable multi-million-dollar transactions, escalating through a network of offshore accounts and the very real luxury assets that he had accumulated. But despite the United States' reputation for employing the world's most aggressive financial crimes agents, ready to go well outside the borders, Epstein was never charged or even thoroughly investigated, while the world's most reputable banks were happy to continue doing business with him until the past few months. More glaring is the scope of his unpunished sex crimes. This was not a relatively common or garden abuser like Harvey Weinstein, extracting sexual favors from adult women he had power over in a string of hotel encounters. Instead, Epstein was apparently the operator of an international sex ring involving hundreds of underage, the article uses the term slaves, picked off from the school and the mall, transported across international borders with knowledge of each other and what must have been a great multitude of bystanders. Yeah, there's no way people within his circle didn't know about it, and therefore they must have fully approved of it. Which means that there must be more than just Epstein in this regard. More, people who like to do it with teenage girls. He could not have been the only one. There's just no freaking way. Yes, Epstein was caught likely decades after he started handing him a notoriously lenient punishment and reportedly allowed to continue his lifestyle while swatting away lawsuits. Throughout all this, the convicted sex offender seems to have been treated with an odd laissez-faire lenience by the media, which is so fascinated now, but with the exception of several dogged local journalists, didn't seem bothered enough to get the bottom of who Epstein really was. Okay, that's an abuse of the term laissez-faire. I'll get into that in a minute. Even if Epstein hadn't been a larger-than-life character, a close associate of formerly the most powerful man in the world, and his wife vying to fill the same position, not to mention a friend of Prince Andrew and Woody Allen, should have been a treasure trove for an ambitious investigator. Yes, some of the allegations may have been difficult to prove, and journalists can't be expected to sneak into the cargo holds of the Lolita Express, but at least since 2005, there has been solid ground on which to build a story in a world where a single #MeToo article can destroy a career. Epstein was indulged like a disgraced Gatsby, holding court for New York Times journalists and boasting about his links to Mohammed bin Salman. The greatest temptation for many now is to write this off as a conspiracy, that Epstein was a protected man due to his connection to the Clintons, that he was a front and a fixer for the CIA or Mossad, that anyone who got in his way from investigators and prosecutors or journalists was paid off, warned off, perhaps blackmailed. Yeah, it's weird how they get so close to the truth and yet it falls short all of a sudden. Or how apparently they can't trace where he got his income from per se. So it's almost like the conspiracy theories might in fact be true in spite of the lack of evidence. Can you imagine that? Now, as to the abuse of the term laissez-faire, You have to understand that such ideas originate from French economics and economic theory. To say that it is somehow laissez-faire not to cover everything he did is incorrect. If we truly had a laissez-faire society, here's what it would look like. Everyone would be allowed to do what they want, within reason. People will not turn a blind eye if someone is abused. That is not correct. That is actually the opposite of laissez-faire. Because, again, laissez-faire means you're allowed to do what you want, including pursuing the punishment of an abuser and a criminal. It is not laissez-faire that protects Jeffrey Epstein and people like him. It is legislation being misused that leads to men like him being protected and getting away with what they want to do. And I'm not saying laissez-faire would allow for vigilante justice necessarily, as I'm sure it would. We'd still have things like police departments, and people would publicly donate to their local officers, and they would receive funding from the government as well. They'd be multi-funded and still just as effective as they are now. Bottom line is, it wasn't laissez-faire that protected him. And quite frankly, the media coverage of just about anything cannot be trusted anyway. He was protected because he had friends in high places. Or low places, depending on how you look at it. Anyway, all other than Alec Baldwin should take a breath here and now wait as more facts are likely to emerge. Not least about Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's currently hard-to-locate partner, whose name has flashed up again and again, though anyone hoping that a fully formed color-coded scheme with arrows, circles, and lists of crimes will ever emerge is likely fooling themselves. But to me, the author of the article, a possibly more terrifying discovery is that there was no conspiracy as such. That's simply through the power granted by his wealth and connection, multiplied by the ability to lead an international lifestyle. Simply put, Epstein outside the reach of the normal legal and societal constraints. We already assume that plutocrats, the political elite, and celebrities live by different rules. But we are not talking about normal rich people indulgencies. The yachts, butlers, and London basement pools. No, we're definitely not talking about that. This is Bond villain level stuff. A private island with a secret temple plans to seed DNA into scores of women, engaging top scientists for transhumanist studies to create a new super race. If we'd learned that instead of grooming young women, Epstein's hobby was transporting and hunting homeless people, would be any more surprised? Would he have found it that much harder to get away with it? Not sure what the author was going on about there. But yeah, there is a weird temple on Epstein's Island. There's an overview footage of it here. There's a picture of it, and I gotta tell you, it looks vaguely Islamic. Like he might have decided to set up like a weird harem full of girls. Yeah. We can tell ourselves that Jeffrey Epstein was a one-off, a uniquely cunning and depraved psychopath with the right connections. But it seems equally plausible that this opulent, global, and lawless netherworld is capable of hiding other depraved transgressors less publicly hungry and more dangerous still in their intentions. The job is to try and stop them now before they die in a New York jail cell, leaving behind a trail of victims. But who has the guts for it? Raise your hands if you want to find these people and bring them to justice. See, here's the thing. Someone somewhere is probably going to try and turn that into a Nazi salute, I just know it. But, yeah, basically, there's just no way this was a one-man show. He clearly had allies, and those allies were most likely approving of it, and therefore most likely into it themselves. So they, too, were most likely a form of pedophile or hebophile, wanting to do it with teenage girls. Or teenage boys, who knows? Maybe that's what they were into. You know, maybe the stories about Bryan Singer were actually true, even though they were never proven. I mean, if we can get Epstein, then maybe Bryan Singer's next, huh? Needless to say, yeah, there are pedophile elites in the government, and in the upper echelons of celebrityhood. They're out there. They exist. We frickin' found one, for God's sake. And then we put him away in a cell, and he somehow manages to hang himself with paper sheets. And they were supposedly screeching or screaming from his cell, while you can hear people shouting, "Breathe, Epstein, breathe!" And his cellmate was mysteriously moved away to another block. Very curious. Almost like he was murdered rather than a suicide. I didn't want to necessarily say anything for definite on that, because there's still so few details. But I think that's about as close as we're going to get to the truth at this point, folks. That's as close as we're going to get. The details that are available clearly seem to suggest that he was murdered, not suicide. Probably because he was going to be able to blow the whistle on the whole thing. At least on Clinton. Anyway.
Peace!